From the banks of Dewey Lake, it's the Dewey Pod Monster.
Like I was trying to say, welcome back. My name is John, and this is the Dewey Pod Monster Podcast. This is a weekly podcast. It is about consumption. We are proud members of the You Run Podcast Network. You can find all of our previous episodes, this episode, and all the other great shows on the You Run Podcast Network at yourunpodcast.com. And with me this week is the host of the Dewey Pod Monster Podcast. His name is Sean, and he has exceptionally long legs. Sean, how are you today?
I worship the devil, that's for sure, but it's the United States. I'm allowed to do that.
You know what? Fair enough.
Thanks.
I can't really argue that. So, Sean, what have you been watching this week?
Something you've been watching.
Hard Knocks?
No, actually, I didn't watch the newest episode yet. I totally forgot that was on until you just brought it up.
Well, spoilers. By far my favorite episode of the whole season because it wasn't just the same thing as the first 4 episodes. But I assume you're referring to the movie The Emasculator. Is that correct?
That's correct. The Emasculator. The feel-good movie of the year. The Emasculator.
I mean, you're going to feel something. That's for sure. So I should mention the Emasculator is a movie that we became aware of because a mutual friend of ours who frequents our Frankenstein's shows at Batch Brewing down in Detroit brought it to our attention and made sure that we got a chance to watch this fine piece of cinema. The Emasculator is basically I'd call it a short contained, somewhere between like rape revenge movie and slasher movie. I think that's probably fair to say. It's a little bit of both. Very shot on video, feeling very high budget. I'm going to say high budget. We looked up how much the Emasculator costs, so that was probably a good chunk of the budget to begin with.
Depending, it can be up to a couple $100, but we're thinking veterinary supply, maybe in the $50 to $150 range for the tool.
It's like the safety scissors version of it. We're bringing this up now because we want to acknowledge just the fact that, like, one, this is really cool that we got to watch a very independent film like this and, you know, get to experience it where a lot of people might not. We don't want to spend too much time on it, though, just because this movie is exceptionally hard to find. It does have a letterbox page, so you can see a little bit about it, but it's not the kind of movie you can just, like, log into Netflix and queue up, so I don't want to go too overboard on it. I will say this, and this probably, if you read the caption or the description of this movie, this shouldn't surprise anyone. If you like dicks, this isn't the movie for you. Like, this movie is not very kind to the male genitalia.
That's true. I mean, the movie's called The Emasculator. So the movie basically, just to kind of jump in, is about, no spoilers, of course, but it's about a young college-age girl that comes home.
I don't think there's really enough to spoil in it. Like, the plot and
there's a twist
that's on. Yeah, I guess.
But anyways, a college-age, roughly, girl comes home to visit her father, who's he's kind of fallen off the rails a little bit. He was an alcoholic and I'm guessing like a drug abuser of some sort. And he is on the straight and narrow now, and he's a little disgusted with himself. And the girl comes home and she's like, "Hey, Dad, been great hanging out with you. I'm glad to see that you're not a drunk so much anymore. I'm going out on a date." And she goes out on a date with this guy that's a local, he's a police officer. He's part of the police force. And she goes out with him and she gets drugged, essentially. And they film this movie, this revenge porn kind of movie, or this, like, I don't know.
It's a rape fantasy.
Yeah, it's like, she is essentially raped in this movie. So super, lighthearted subject matter here. And the dad goes nuts. He's an ex-Green Beret, and he takes his emasculator, which is a tool to emasculate livestock, and he neuter? What's the word?
Off.
Castrate livestock. So he goes a little nutty with that, and it's a revenge thing. One thing I thought was really cool about the movie is that they show, like, all this stuff is kind of surrounding these guys making these porn movies of rape, essentially, but they're kind of mixing them in a way that you can't really tell who the victims are, but they have the masters. Obviously, they have the real clips of what's going on, and that's not the cool part. The cool part is the juxtaposition between seeing random kind of porn clips they're all circuit bent and stuff, so they're glitched out.
The same clip used over and over.
Well, some of them are a little different, but the way that there's nothing in this that you would watch and be like, "Oh yeah." I mean, they're penetration and stuff, porn. There's nothing you would watch on this and be like, "Yeah, I would hope a sane person would watch this and be like, yeah, this is not a turn on at all." I mean, which it shouldn't be, but the way that we kind of view porn in culture these days is always like, oh, it's always about sex. It's always like to get to get off, essentially. And this movie is like, it juxtaposes that, hey, let's get off with this. No, these people are getting their dicks cut off,
Right.
I just thought it was a cool kind of trading places thing going on in the movie.
Yeah, I mean, it's it's been said before, like I don't really see the need to put rape in any movie. I feel like that's kind of not the subject matter that I care to dwell on,
engage with.
Yeah, like I don't really need that. That said, if you're gonna put it in your movie and counter it with a very heavy-handed revenge story, I mean, it's not the worst thing that I've seen, to say the least. There is the practical effects aren't the worst I've seen in this either, especially for what this movie is and, the shot on video feel and all that. There's a lot of like practical, as long as you don't mind seeing dicks get mutilated, the practical stuff is pretty well executed for the most part in this movie. I'm not going to go as far, just because of what the subject matter is, I wouldn't go as far to say it's a fun watch, but if you like shot on video stuff and you happen to come across it, you can do a lot worse.
Yeah, it's a super love letter to shot on video movies. And just to mention, the director is Susanna Capostasi, which hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly, but I believe if you search the Emasculator, she has a movie. I think one of her previous movies is on Vimeo.
I thought that was the sequel. That's the other one, right?
Well, it came out before this.
Did it? Okay.
I believe.
Then maybe not.
So if you're interested,
I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, the only thing I was able to find it on was Letterboxd. It comes up on there, but I didn't see a IMDb page or anything like that. All right. Was there anything else that you watched over the course of the week?
No, it's been a busy week. At the time that we're recording this, it's the end of the Labor Day week, and my work week was like, this is the longest 4-day week of all time for me.
You and me both, buddy. Like mine was only a 3-day week, and it was the longest 3-day week that I've had in a long fucking time too. And I'm not a fan of that. But hey, here we are. We're here to talk to you about stuff. I will say one thing that I watched. This was a rewatch, but I had a hell of a lot of fun with it, and I haven't watched this in a couple decades. Like the last time I watched this movie, it was probably watched on VHS. I rewatched the movie Alligator from 1980. You've seen that, I'm sure, right?
I don't think I've ever seen it. I mean, I've known of it. I've known of its lore and its history, but I don't think I've actually sat down and watched the whole thing.
Well, I'm going to design recording so you can, call me out on it later if you want. I think it's whenever we get to a month that doesn't have a theme when it comes to Frankenstein's, I think it'd be a good one to play in a bar with a bunch of people watching it, because there is some shit in that movie that happens that is just fucking nuts and kind of fun and stuff that you don't see on a regular basis anymore. So I'm going to push to revisit it at some point, whether it's as an episode or as a Frankenstein night or both. I don't know yet, but I had a hell of a lot of fun with it on the one night that I actually got to watch something. But past that, I mean, again, this is a short week. It's a weird week. The only other thing we got is our main topic. Unless you want to talk about football, and, that started this week. We have actual football now, not just us talking about Hard Knocks. Is that anything of interest?
I mean, we kind of had a pre-show conversation about this, but I think we can have the abridged version.
A powwow, if you will.
We can have the abridged version. Basically, I don't know. I like football. I like to watch football, but I don't like that the NFL looks at the fans as an open wallet to just bilk money from, and they spread it out on all these online services. I mean, I have all the online services, so I have all of them. It's not a humble brag or anything. I'm just saying I pay for Netflix. I took the plunge. The whole kind of conversation happened, audience. And I'm rich, obviously, because I pay for all the services. So I got the NFL Sunday Ticket through YouTube, which is a 4-month thing. And while I have all the streaming services, if you didn't have those, I feel like you would, for these specialty games that are on Thursdays or Fridays, the Amazon Prime games, the Netflix games, the fucking Peacock games, and then on top of it, the national games that are actually on broadcast TV, I'd feel like a real schmuck if I had paid for this and didn't have access to those other games. Buying this, obviously you're buying a network or you're buying a TV package so you can watch all these games. Not that I'm going to watch every game that's on, but just, you're buying it for the quote unquote privilege to watch these games. And then not all the games are on there. I just think that's kind of bullshit.
Well, it's bullshit because they sell it as if you're going to be able to watch every game, because the allure of whatever they call it, was that Sunday Ticket? That's what they call it, right?
Yep.
The whole idea of that is that you never miss a game, that you can do the 8-box thing on your TV. If your TV has that much room, and you can watch 8 games at once, or you can bounce between all this shit.
I think it's 4, but yeah, multiple games, regardless.
Whatever.
Mm-hmm.
The point is, you're supposed to have access to all this, and then they're like, except for all the shit where we're saying like, we're gonna bilk you out of it, and you still have to pay extra on top. It's
scummy.
It feels like a back alley hand job, but the hand job's done with a sandpaper glove.
Oh, I was going to go like Kickboxer with Tong Po. They dip their hands in the whatever it is in the glass, the broken glass.
Yeah, that's not great either.
But that would be on the inside of the hand, just for visualization purposes.
Either way, it's not
it's not an inviting thought.
It's not. No. So now that we've talked about ruining wangs for the first 15 minutes of this episode, we're going to take a break and pad Sean's wallet so he can continue to purchase all these streaming services. And then we'll be back to talk about the movie Longlegs. If you have a soft spot for nostalgia and all things pop culture related, then you need to check out Video Tasties on YouTube. You can find them at the You Run Podcast Network and also at youtube.com/@VideoTasties. Video Tasties features theatrical versus extended cut content, as well as retrospectives on TV shows, movies, video game reviews, and throwbacks. Basically, if it's anything from your past that you want to go back and relive, Video Tasties has a video for you that can let you do that.
And they're a member of the You Run Podcast Network. You can find them at yourunpodcast.com.
So we're back, and as mentioned, we're going to talk about the movie Longlegs. So Longlegs, I'm going to put this out there now, right at the front, right at the beginning, and get it out of the way, because I will tell you, I don't care who you are, if you have not seen this movie, it is infinitely more enjoyable going into this movie knowing as little as possible about it. So if you have not seen this movie, I hope that you kind of stop right now and go watch it and come back and hear after that. I don't even know what type of spoilers we might or might not get into. I don't think we'll do anything that will ruin the movie, but I think that the less you know about this movie going into it, the more you're going to enjoy it. So that's your spoiler warning now. Is that fair?
And I would like to propose that we go as spoiler free as possible, because this, like you just said, I feel like this is a movie that we obviously will talk about the movie. That's what the topic is this week. There's no way we can totally pussyfoot around the entire thing, but if this is, I agree with what you said. If this is a movie that you're moderately interested in, you should go watch it before you listen to this.
So with that said, we're gonna head over to Letterboxd this week for our third-party review, and this review is from Teresa Hole. That's the name, Teresa Hole, one word. And Teresa Hole says, calling yourself Longlegs as a serial killer is so cunty low-key. Like, what if I went by Big Fat Juicy Booty Strangler? 3.5 stars. So, Sean?
As I nod my head, I like your ideas.
We now have the Big Fat Juicy Booty Strangler and the low-key cunty Longlegs to talk about. What is the low-key cunty Longlegs about?
Okay, and so for that, we go over to IMDb, where we check out the page for Longlegs. This gets a 6.8 out of 10 from 87,000 reviews. This is ranked number 2 out of some number, which is up 8 from, I guess, 10. I could never do the math before, and now that makes total perfect sense, especially when they're single digits.
Is this the highest ranked movie that we've done, or have we had a number 1?
I think we've done a number 1, or at least a number 2 before. Yeah. So
okay.
Anyway. Storyline and the plot, never know which one's which, but we're going to start with the one on the top first because it's at the top. In pursuit of a serial killer, an FBI agent uncovers a series of occult clues that she must solve to end his terrifying killing spree. And if we scroll down to the bottom to the storyline, I guess that makes the other one the plot. It says FBI agent Lee Harker is a gifted new recruit assigned to the unsolved case of an elusive serial killer. As the case takes complex turns, unearthing evidence of the occult, Harker discovers a personal connection to the merciless killer and must race against time to stop him before he claims the lives of another innocent family.
So we'll say some of the simple things with this. This is very obviously a movie that takes place in the 90s. I love the way they tell you that by not saying that it's 1990, whatever. Just like they go into an FBI office and there's this gigantic picture of Bill Clinton just like sticking out like a sore thumb, because, this movie is very 90s feeling in the sense that I got a lot of vibes from like movies like Seven and Silence of the Lambs. Those movies that were very popular for a while in the like mid 90s to like early aughts of the like cat and mouse FBI versus serial killer type movies. And one of the only things that is like very vibrantly colored in this movie, like there's a lot of like drab tones and stuff like that, is this fucking giant picture of Bill Clinton.
Yeah, very true.
And it kind of makes you laugh.
Yeah, it is. I was trying to place when I thought in the 90s it took place. The thing that I noticed first, once they get into quote unquote present day of the movie, is the cars. Like they drive, I think the first car that they're in is like a T-Bird or a, what's the Mercury version of the T-Bird? The Cougar?
Sable?
No, they had like a Cougar. They had that car and I was like, what FBI agent drives around in a Cougar? I don't know. I don't think those are government issue, but I like that they go from the fashion to the cars, the music somewhat. There's not a whole lot of music in the movie, but they really set.
It's very ambient.
Yeah, they don't come out and say what the time frame is, but especially the Bill Clinton thing really puts a 8-year span as to when it could take place. But you kind of get that 90s feeling before anything like the glaring clue of Bill Clinton in the background. I don't know. He's practically like giving a thumbs up, like, yeah, Bill Clinton, good job. This is my cigar thumb.
I'm glad that this movie is set in the time where it is. Like, there's two things I like about that. One, they beat you over the head with it being the 90s without beating you over the head. Like, there's no big title card that says like October
90s.
1992 or something. There's nothing like that, but they make it obvious at the same time, so you know that. And because of that, there's no internet, there's no cell phones, there's nothing like that where you can watch it and say, well, why don't they just run a DNA sample or something? Like, I don't remember right now if DNA was brought up in this movie or not. That would have been right around the time that DNA was becoming a thing, but it's not a plot point that you're like, why don't they do this or this or this? All these things that we know about from, watching CSI Miami, for 20 years. None of that shit's here. It's just like at this point, a very old-fashioned cop drama type story. This movie also, so we mentioned that Nick Cage is in this movie. This is a well-done role for him because he is definitely the star and the draw in this movie, but he's also very much so not the star or who carries this movie at all. He's what you're going to remember from this movie, probably more than anything, but his physical contribution to the film, like time that he's on screen, is very minimal compared to Lee Harker. She plays an FBI agent.
Yeah, and the thing with Nick Cage too is for a lot of the first half of this movie, or at least the first third of the movie, they do their best to not even show you what he looks like. They actively avoid showing his face or really much about him other than maybe he has hair. Like, he has hair. Do we want to get into the cast here?
Yeah, let's go over the cast real quick before we go too far.
Okay, so the cast, there's really 4 main characters, and there's one, I'm just going to mention the kind of highly visible actors or the people you might recognize. So we've got Micah Monroe, who probably is best known for It Follows. She's been in some other stuff. She was in God is a Bullet, which I talked about, I think, earlier this year, one of my what you've been watching kind of movies. She's also in Honey Boy, a few other things. We also obviously have Nicolas Cage, who has been in all the Nicolas Cage things that Nicolas Cage does. We have Alicia Witt, who I know her best from Sybil, which is like a 1990s show with Sybil Shepherd, where she plays one of the kids, but one of the daughters. She was also in Dune as a small child. She was in Urban Legend. She's been in a lot of stuff. She's I don't know, for lack of a better term, a red-haired actress that you may recognize. She has a ton of credits, like over 90 credits.
She's a working actress that I say this with all due respect. Like, I don't mean this as an insult. She's a star that's in a lot of movies, but never the lead in a movie.
Yeah, or very few. Maybe in the early or mid to late 90s, she was probably a lead. And then we have Blair Underwood, who plays Agent Carter, I believe. He's been in a ton of stuff, too. He's another working actor. His big break was probably LA Law, but he's been in a lot of TV shows. He's been in a lot of series. But yeah, I haven't seen him, but he's another working actor. He's got 12 credits in the 2020s, from an episode of TV to 10 episodes in a series to movies and everything. So he's very recognizable. When you see him, you know who he is.
He's a great character in this movie because he's the one character in this movie that the audience can almost identify with as, at least for this movie, you almost look at him like, oh, he's the somewhat normal guy.
He's like the stand-in for the audience, I think.
Yeah.
And the other person I wanted to mention just briefly is Kiernan Shipka, who she plays a really small part, but she was in Mad Men. She was in Riverdale. She was in the Sabrina the Teenage Witch. remake. She seemed like she was in Twisters most recently. Totally killer. She seems like she's kind of the prototypical Jenna Ortega to me. Like she was the it girl for a while in a lot of horror violence kind of shit for when it called for like a young actress who was
blonde,
teens and 20s. She seemed like she was the one they called until they started calling Jenna Ortega instead.
We don't need a blonde anymore. Get someone who has
dark hair.
Not.
Yeah.
Whatever. So I went into this movie. The only thing I knew about this movie when I went into it is that it had Nicolas Cage in it as a serial killer. Did you know much about this going into it other than that?
No, I mean, that was pretty much the extent of what I knew. I'd seen the trailer because I feel like it was kind of hard to avoid. I hadn't seen the full trailer, but just like...
I missed the trailer, and I'm fine with that.
The part that I think I saw the most was when he does the hand thing, where he puts his hands over his eyes, but he crosses them. And then I think there's a quick scene. It was like a teaser. So it was like a 30-second spot they put on TV, and where Micah Monroe is like, she has her back to the wall and she's kind of breathing, like panting. And that's all I had seen. But I'd seen things like the quotes, the critics quotes critic quotes that said something comparing it to Silence of the Lambs, and seeing all the stuff that was saying, best horror movie of 2024 and all that stuff. So that's not nothing, just to kind of put that out there. But that's the most I had seen about it. I hadn't read anything about it. I actively avoided as much as I could.
Yeah, that's pretty much what I did. And when I also started really hearing about this movie around the same time that we had just done In a Violent Nature. So when it started getting called, when this became the next movie that is the horror movie that's saving the horror genre for all that shit, honestly, I kind of got turned off to it. I was ready to be like, you know what? I just came off of one movie that infuriated me, that was called the next best horror movie ever and all that. Like, I'm kind of over this, like, overhyping everything for no fucking reason. Now, I'll put it out there now. This is not the best horror movie that I've ever seen. This is not the best, like, cat and mouse FBI versus serial killer movie I've ever seen. It does a lot of things I like quite a bit in it. But if you're going into this movie based off that hype, there's a good chance you're going to be disappointed. That's why I said at the start of this, the less you know about this movie going into it, really the better off you're going to be.
Yeah, and I feel, just as kind of a side commentary, I feel like the whole best horror movie du jour kind of, rotating
bullshit,
Lazy Susan of horror movies that are coming out next week really is killing a lot of these movies for me.
Oh, for sure. It does. Yeah, and I mean, honestly, I'd rather have the old-fashioned Siskel and Ebert version of this is a fucking horrible movie, you should never watch this. I'd rather have that. At least it's one of two things, and you're either like, okay, they were right, fair enough, or okay, this pissed them off for a reason. You have something to kind of go in with. I'm not saying you, but when you're just going into a movie and people are just dick rubbing it before you even get a chance to see it, it's calm the fuck down.
Well, I wanted to ask too, this isn't one of those movies that we heard about where somebody had to run out of the screener because they were sick. This isn't one of those, right?
I don't remember hearing that. I remember hearing that for Violent Nature,
yes,
but I don't remember hearing that on this.
Okay. I don't remember that either, but I wouldn't be surprised.
And that's also the laziest promotion thing at this point. We heard that about Terrifier last year. We heard that about A Violent Nature. And for all these movies, even for Longlegs, you don't go into this. I don't think people buy a movie just completely oblivious to what they're seeing. I'm not saying you have to know the plot or the plot points, but I think you're going to know it's a horror movie or this could be a scary movie. I don't think your average person just goes and says 1 ticket for Terrifier 2, please, while clutching their Bible and holding their barf bag ready to be regurgitating the popcorn that they just shoveled down their throat. If you're that kind of movie viewer, the fuck are you doing going in that theater in the first place?
I want to say, I know I've told the story before, but that reminded me of my in-laws when they would just go see movies. They would just randomly on a Friday, oh, new movie came out, gonna go see a movie. One of the movies that I always thought was hilarious that they went and saw was You Got Served. Yeah, we're just gonna go to the movies, let's go see You Got Served. Why the fuck not?
Did they vomit?
They probably did. Power vomit, to use a Johnism.
Power vomit. That's fair. So, Sean, what did you just real high overview? What were some of your thoughts on this one?
You kind of mentioned it earlier. I liked the cat and mouse of the movie. I liked that the story is the way that the story unfolds. And I think this, for me personally, this is kind of a positive and a negative. But at first, the way that the story unfolds, they tell you just what you need to know. They don't tell you too much, They don't tell you until the movie progresses, and I felt like they still didn't tell me all that much after a while, that I felt like I wasn't getting enough information. Like the story just kind of plays along and you're like, okay, I can kind of just, I can be on the lazy river of this movie, and it just, hey, there's a thing that came and it went and it passed. Okay, cool. I also like a lot of the technique that they use. The movie is very dark, and you brought it up earlier. It's very drab. It's very dark. There's a lot of scenes that are,
it's very uncomfortable.
Yeah, it's almost like anxiety inducing in a way, because the way that they film stuff, there'll be these odd angles where it's really wide, and they'll do this really slow kind of zoom in, and you feel like Lee is being watched from afar, even if nobody's there, like she's in a totally empty place.
They use this angle 2 or 3 times where, I'm sorry I'm interrupting, but I want to kind of jump on with that. She'll be like sitting at her desk in her house, and if you're looking at like on your TV screen, like she's like tucked away in like the bottom third of the screen, and the rest of the screen is like this dark, poorly lit house, but you can very clearly see an open doorway which leads into like a kitchen or something like that, and there's more light in the kitchen than there is in the room she's in. And what it's going to make you do is, at least for me, I'm not even watching her that closely. I'm watching everything behind her, because again, as a horror audience, we're looking for all the stupid little things when you're just convinced in your head like something's going to happen here. Like I didn't ever get the feeling like, oh, Nick Cage is going to come out and just like stab her in the back and that's going to be it. I didn't get that or think that was going to happen, but I did expect to see him either like shuffle through or something to happen in the background. And more often than not, that's not what you get.
Yeah, it's built that way. It's shot that way to draw your eyes to that spot.
Yep.
And that kind of goes with my next point, hand in hand, what you just said. There are scenes specifically at the opening that they do this technique where they kind of just show you a window of the movie, and the rest of it's black. And there's a couple places where they do these audio stabs where they switch the scene, they play this audio stab, and it draws your eye to the picture, and you're anticipating that something's going to be in there that catches your eye, but it's just a plain landscape. And then they do it again, and it's a plain landscape. And then later in the movie, there is a scene or two where something will be covered. Okay, again, I don't want to give it away, but there will be someone will be covered, and you can kind of see their eyes for just a second, and then their eyes, like the light of their eye kind of fades in with what the black that they're covered with. And they do a part where you feel like you can see Nicolas Cage in a background, but he kind of fades into the fog, or the fog kind of overtakes him, where he just totally fades out. And I thought that was really cool. I really enjoyed the technical aspects of the movie, like the way it was shot, how dark it was. This is a movie for me that I feel like, again, not knowing a lot going into it, you should watch this in a dark room, because I think it will.
Absolutely.
Because I watched it total daylight, and I had like a light on in the room, and it was already pretty bright. When I turned that light off, it immediately added a next level of that kind of like uneasy, anxious feeling, because then I'm not so comfortable watching a movie when I don't know what's going to happen, because the way the scenes are set up that make you feel so much like anxiety about it. Being in a darker room would even enhance that more.
I completely agree with that. One of the things that I found interesting about this movie, and this is also kind of a positive and a negative at the same time, when I watched it, and I wanted to watch it a second time, because I actually watched it last week, thinking I was probably going to want to see it the second time before we talked about it, and I just ran out of time to do it. But what I really liked is this is the first movie in quite a while that kind of stuck with me. Like after I finished it, I found myself kind of going back and thinking about the weird camera angles, the weird lighting, the sound, all that stuff that you just mentioned. I found myself kind of dwelling on it for a couple days and like almost reliving the movie in my head and wanting to go back to it. Now, the counterpoint to that is the only time I watched it, it's a very, very slow burn, almost to the point where I found myself kind of bored at times, because when there isn't like a anxiety inducing like camera angle or scene going on, it's like a lot of very slow procedural stuff. Now, in retrospect, looking back at it, it does a lot of, storytelling in it. I would say you could almost say that the storytelling is kind of just very linear. And I don't remember which one of these things it was in that we read that says it has twists and turns. And there is a plot twist at the end, but I feel like before you get to the plot twist at the end, you can almost see it coming like a mile away. Like, I don't think this movie is I don't think the story of this movie is overly drawn out or overly complex. I feel like it's pretty, if you start at the beginning of the movie, they're going to walk you right through point A to point B and right through to the end of the movie. But because of the way the cinematography is done, everything that we mentioned already, that's what makes this movie kind of stick out, is it makes you go back and want to revisit all that because of how well shot it is and how off-putting it is in a lot of ways. You almost want to go back and, like, I feel like I miss things in it, even though it's a fairly simple, straightforward movie.
I can kind of agree with you that it's a fairly straightforward, simple movie, but I feel like it also isn't. I mean,
that's fair. No, you're not wrong. Like I said, that's why I said fairly straightforward.
Yeah, I mean, they kind of, how can I put this? They do really very slowly feed you information. There's like 2 or 3 twists, and they all happen in quick succession at the end of the movie.
It's all like the last 20 minutes of the movie.
Yeah, 20 minutes is like, oh, okay, you're finally giving me this information. Like, how does Lee know this information? How does it relate to this? How does it relate to this other thing? And they give it to you so slow that, like you said, at times I just felt myself like, okay, there's so much anxiety built. And as an audience that watches a movie like a thriller or horror movies, you expect the unexpected. You're going to expect that at any time, they're in a barn and they pull up the floorboard because it's X marks the spot kind of thing. And there's something in there, and it's kind of like a bit of a movie magic, right? To kind of transform the story, to kind of give you one of those little pieces of what you're going to need to know later on in the movie. But that whole time they're in the darkness, and you're expecting that something's just some jump scare. And that's one thing I wanted to mention. That particular scene is like the only time I felt an actual jump scare in this movie, which is kind of commendable in a way, because movies sometimes can feel like they rely too much on the jump scare. And this one, to me, only had that one. But I just felt like they gave you the story so slow. They started to turn the key, and the little tumblers in the lock started turning one by one. And you finally, when you get to the end, it's not all that shocking, but it kind of is at the same time, which is, it's odd. The whole thing is just really odd to me.
Yeah, and you kind of mentioned this. What's interesting or different about this movie, because of the lack of jump scares, or the lack of things that, I don't want to say the lack of things that happen, because things do happen in the movie, but that tension and that intensity from this movie, usually when you're talking about whether even like a movie like Seven or like a Silence of, those types of movies, which I feel like this movie very obviously was influenced by. I'm not saying it's a direct copy of it, because I mean, frankly, I think the other two are just better films, but I think this one obviously pulls a lot of influence from that. But there's never, generally in a movie, when you have tension building up, it gets to a point and then they release it with either a jump scare, a laugh, a kill, something, that never really happens in this movie until the very end. And even then, yes, you release the tension, because at that point, all the cards are on the table. We know what's going on, like, definitively and whatnot. But it doesn't feel, it's like in this movie, if every other movie that's this kind of movie releases the tension by popping the balloon, this one unties the knot and just lets it go out all in about 20 minutes.
Yeah, that's super fair. That's a good analogy, because that's, yeah. By the time you get to the very end, again, don't want to give it away.
I do want to talk a little bit about the ending, but I'm going to put another spoiler warning there, and I don't want to go into what actually happens, but I want to anyway,
talk in vagaries. But yeah, I mean, you're just kind of like, oh, all right, I guess that happened. That's kind of how I felt at the end, and it made me really conflicted as to how I feel about the movie, honestly.
And that's kind of where I've been for the last couple days with it, is kind of conflicted. And I actually kind of like that, because as I mentioned, there's not a lot of movies anymore that I leave and don't have an immediate opinion about. And it might sway a little bit, but like, I haven't had to sit and think about how I really felt about a movie in a long fucking time. I can't think of the last movie where I was like, did I like that? Did I not? Like, I feel like I know more of how I actually feel about it now, but like the fact that this movie actually made me stop and think about it for long after it ended, I actually feel like that's as much of an achievement as anything else I've seen in film this year. How do you feel about Nick Cage in this movie?
That's a good question. How do I feel about Nick Cage? I think he does he puts on a great performance. The way that they use the makeup on him, he doesn't look like Nick Cage. It's weird because
he looks like Nick Cage wearing a mask. Me.
I could see that, but for me, I feel like it's one of those things where you hear the voice, you know it's him, you can see parts of him under the mask, under the makeup, because it's clearly like prosthetics and stuff. It's not CG. He's not wearing like a full-blown mask. I'm sure it's some kind of pieced together prosthetic thing. Hearing the voice, he uses his voice differently than I think I've seen maybe ever, but definitely for a long time. So I don't know if your dad always had a beard and he came in and one day just shaved his beard and he comes in and he talks and you're like, I know that's my dad, but he doesn't have his beard and he always has a beard. Like if I shave my beard and my kids saw me, they probably freak the fuck out.
It's weird when that happens.
Yeah. And that's how I kind of feel about Nick Cage in this movie. You hear the voice, you know it's him. Obviously, you know he's in this movie. But when he talks and his actions, he is so different than he's actually like really acting. Although not to say he doesn't really act otherwise, but he's putting on this affectation on his voice. His mannerisms are different. He's not doing Cageisms. It's an interesting role. And I think he probably sold a lot of tickets. Like, I feel like you hear, oh yeah, Nick Cage is in this movie. And if you're a person that's into Nick Cage, you're like, I'm going to go see whatever Nick Cage does. They don't show his face for like the first third or half of the movie. And then he's in it a little bit more. And he's just such an enigma. Like the character is such an enigma. He kind of talks in these weird riddles that you kind of, not necessarily riddles, but it's just, the whole thing is just weird. It's just weird. That's like the best thing I can say.
I like that this movie really, because this movie was sold to me by the studio as Nick Cage playing a serial killer. Once I heard that, I didn't need anything else. Like that was enough to sell a ticket to me. That said, I really like that they went with the less is more approach on Nick Cage in almost every aspect of what Nick Cage is in this movie. One, he's not in it a ton. He's probably got like 15-ish minutes of screen time in this whole movie. I'm sure someone's already counted it up. I didn't do that, but I'm ballparking probably 15-ish minutes of screen time. He is very sedate by Nick Cage standards for the majority of his time on screen. I will say when he turns it up and turns it to 11, and he does that probably 2 or 3 times in the course of this movie, I almost feel like that takes me out of what his character is being portrayed. Like I almost liked him more being the sedate, weird, creepy Nick Cage compared to the loud, abrasive, clearly crazy Nick Cage. Like I feel like that almost kind of broke his character a little bit. But enough happens to kind of like, I mean, by the time that his character arc closes in this movie, like he's just a fucking nut. And then you find out there's a little bit more to it. But I think this is, as far as like performances go, this is probably on the upper tier of the movies that he's done. And it's obviously not, he's such a bizarre actor to begin with. Like, how do you even compare Nick Cage roles? Like, how do you compare a movie like Longlegs just for him to a movie like, I don't know, Raising Arizona? It's 2 totally different sports. Like you're not even talking about the same thing, which is a credit to him because he can play both those characters well. But I do think like there's a couple points in this where Oz Perkins should have been like, you're at about a 15 now. I need you to bring it back down to a 9 and kind of keep it there. So we didn't mention that, by the way. Oz Perkins, if you don't know, he's, son of horror royalty, basically. So he does have whatever credit that's worth. So kind of a cool little Easter egg if you didn't know that.
As you were talking about it, I kind of came up with this idea. His character in this movie, Longlegs, Nick Cage's character in this movie, is like a weird cross between, and I thought of this movie too while I was watching it a little bit. It kind of popped into my head a couple times, but he's like this weird cross between Tiny Tim and the bad guy that we saw last year, 2 years ago, Ethan Hawke's character in Black Phone. He's like walking the line. He's got the look of like Tiny Tim. He's got the hair is all curly and weird, and he has that kind of high-pitched, weird register that he goes into, which I don't know if it's necessarily, it could be, effect enhanced or whatnot. Who cares? This is 90s. Black Phone was, I think, 70s or 80s-ish. It's a kind of a similar feel in a way, I thought. The character specifically, not necessarily the movie, but the characters.
I can see, I didn't think of that until just now when you said it, but I can see that. I feel like this character is even though he's not on screen that much, I feel like he's dramatically more fleshed out than what Ethan Hawke's character was in that movie, the Diddler, Grabbler, whatever the fuck his name was.
The Diddler or something. Maybe that's just what we called him.
Grabber, but I think,
the Lopper.
Diddler is more effective. Yeah, there you go. They do a really good job of fleshing out this character in the little time that he's on there, and a lot of that has to do with basically everything about this character being retold through the two FBI agents, Carter and Harker, that are chasing him. But it's interesting. You learn a lot about this guy, and he's really, in the big picture, a very small part of like what's in this movie. We're only bouncing around a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about the ending, but again, this is going to be a very vague way of saying it because I don't want to spoil it. And you might disagree with me with this. I feel like for a movie that was up until a point very grounded, the way they took the very end of the movie almost brought me out of it a little bit. Because it goes from a very grounded, realistic, real life approach to the serial killer. And then it takes it to a very
non-grounded.
Yeah, we'll leave it at that. Because if I call it anything else, it's going to give away what happens. It does take it to a very non-grounded spot. And then what's weird about it is not only is what happens with the main villain not grounded, it almost like infects every other character in the movie and becomes very non-grounded. I still don't entirely know how I feel about that. Like when I watched it the first time, I remember thinking, or when I watched it, I remember thinking like, okay, well, that's a way to end this. And it all makes sense. Like the way it's written, the way it's told, the way, like what they give you in the movie. It's not like one of those movies where this all happens and you're like, well, where the fuck did that come from? Or how the fuck did that happen? Like it all makes sense and it's all practical for the world that we're given in this movie. But it does take a very, almost like a radical genre turn in the third act that I'm still not 100% sure how I feel about it.
Yeah, and I feel like this is one of those movies that they, in the last 15, 20 minutes, they expect that you're going to start building the puzzle from the inside out rather than building all the edges first and, you know, all that stuff. They're going to give you enough pieces where you're like, oh, okay, that's how this relates to that. And okay, now they said this earlier. It's kind of like that, but I don't know. I think we've said it enough times where, and you put it perfectly, it's like you're waiting for the balloon to pop and instead it's just like they just like spread the neck of the balloon open and the air just escapes and makes a funny noise. And you're like, oh, okay, that's not necessarily what I expected or it's strong to say how I wanted this to end, but you know,
right.
You get like this feeling and then they, like you said, they kind of just unravel everything that you're expecting. I don't know. It's a weird
That's the weirdest part about it is, again, I'm not necessarily like, I can't think of one off the top of my head, but there's plenty of movies where you get to the end and it ruins the whole movie for you. It's like you had this great meal and then instead of bringing you a nice cupcake at the end, they brought you a turd and just shoved it right down your throat. It's not that. Like, I mean,
have you been to dinner at my parents' house before?
Several times. I don't know why you're never there.
Now you know.
No, it's not that though. Like it's, again, as far as the story goes and the story they present, it all lines up. Like, you know, you mentioned the key going in and the different, like the lock kind of falling in place. That all works. It does, I guess, technically pull everything off in a way that makes sense. I guess the question is it a satisfying ending?
Yeah.
Which,
just because it's like that doesn't mean you have to like it.
Right.
Or that you agree with that's how it should have been. Yeah. That's kind of what I was getting at.
And I really like, it's funny because this is one of the few times that I will say it like this. Like, I would almost want to have the conversation where we go into the, like, stop beating around the bush and saying things very vaguely, because it almost deserves that conversation. But at the same time, if you're still listening and somehow haven't seen it, I don't want to pop the bubble for you. You get to have the slow leak like the rest of us had.
Yeah. Yeah. For better or for worse.
Yeah. Well, what time is it, Sean?
Then you're in for a big treat, bro, because it's hot dog time.
So I think I picked this one. So I'll lead. I demanded this one. So I'll go ahead and lead us off. For me, I at the end of the day, I do enjoy this. Like, I come around to the fact that I do definitely like this movie. I'm not going to go as far to say like it's the best of the year or like it's genre defining or any of that type of shit. But if you like movies like those 90, horror thrillers, you're going to feel right at home with this for the most part. It is a very slow burn, so be ready for that. You're not going to get cop chases and kick fighting and champagne and bullets like we've been talking about the last couple weeks. But as long as you are cognitive enough to be able to follow the story, so maybe not one to get loaded before you start watching, as long as you follow the story, this movie shouldn't lose you at any point. It's beautifully shot. It's very, like, the cinematography in this, like, deserves at least an Oscar nod, in my opinion. Like, it is, the camera work is great. Everything about this movie and how it's presented from a technical standpoint is top notch. The only real big potential negative is I still don't entirely negatives, I should say. I don't entirely know if I liked how this movie ended. I have been wrestling with that for the better part of a week. And again, for me, there were times where I kind of found myself a little bit bored watching it the first time. I do still want to go back and revisit this at least once more and see if I still feel bored at times. And if I do, that would almost take like a couple hot dogs off of the score. But if I don't, I don't feel like this is the kind of movie I'm just going to watch like repeatedly, like maybe more than one more time. But I do think at the end of the day, it's more good than bad. So for me, I'm going to give this, I don't even have a good hot dog analogy. I'm going to give it a good 6.5 out of 10.
Whose hot dog is this, huh? Is it yours?
I don't know. I wrote like what I was going to say here at the end, and just so I could kind of follow my thoughts on it as I, wrote them immediately after I finished watching it. But the thing about movies in general for me, I love going into a movie, not knowing anything about it, watching it, being super surprised. But I like when a movie presents to me things that I can use to figure out what's going on in the movie. And I feel like this movie doesn't really do that. And it kind of goes back to what you said about the end, where you kind of feel like you're being led down one path, and then the twists start to happen in the movie, and all of a sudden it's like a different movie. Like it's a totally different movie than what you were kind of expecting to see. And sometimes that's great, but it also kind of feels like a bait and switch a little bit, and I don't know how I feel about that. I thought the themes, I thought the acting, the characters, all super interesting. The movie, like we said earlier, made you feel anxious. There's like disturbing parts of the story, different disturbing things that I liked about the movie, and I thought they had really good elements. I just don't know if I like specifically how the story was told. So I've said it a couple times. I'm just really conflicted how to feel about this movie. I feel like this is a movie that I need to see at least one more time, maybe a couple times, to really have it either grow on me or be like, okay, I've seen this once. I know what they're going to do. I've seen this again. How does that fit together? Do they give you any clues leading up to it? It feels like a movie that needs more than one watch to me. But at this point, I just feel like I got to give it, I'm going to mirror what you said. I got to give it 6.5 old lady men out of 11 hot dogs. It's just, I think the word that I've used, I know that I've used the most in this episode, and I think that you've used it quite a few times, is just weird. It's a weird thing, and that's really very vague, but watch it. You got to watch it. You'll probably think it's weird too.
You said you watched this today.
Yeah.
I honestly, I'm not saying that we need to come back and do like a touch base on this or something, but I'd be interested to know, and I might ask you this like off mic, I'd be interested to know how you feel about it tomorrow in comparison to how you feel about it today. Because like I said, for me, after I watched it, like my immediate thought was like, well, that was kind of boring, but it quickly turned into like, actually, and so on. And now I'm at least, middle of the road on it, if nothing else.
Yeah. I mean, even just talking about it like this, I write a lot of notes. Depending on the movie, I can write a lot of notes. If it's a movie, sometimes if there's not a whole lot that goes on, I don't write much for my notes to kind of refer, oh, this thing. This movie, I wrote between like what you've been watching stuff, I wrote very little. Other than the runtime is an hour and 41 minutes long and maybe 10 sentences, like total, which is nothing compared to what I'm usually writing, like 60, 70, 80 sentences, couple, maybe, 4, 5, 6 paragraphs, not necessarily just things that happen that I want to bring up. But this one, I'm interested to hear what people think about this episode, of our episode about this, because it feels much more like a flowing conversation about like, yeah, that's weird. Like we both just went about it in different directions, but we kind of came to the same conclusion. It's odd.
Yeah.
Weird again.
I'm also curious how much of that is the fact that I watched it a week ago and you watched it today.
Mm-hmm.
But whatever. So yeah, if you want us to revisit this, maybe we can make a, shoot the shit about that and shoot the shit on Longlegs for a second time or something. I don't know. We'll see how that goes.
That would have
Not
to be
promising.
post second viewing, of course.
Right. For both of us.
Yeah.
We're going to move on. We're going to move to question of the week. And we went a little clickbaity this week. Our question is pretty simple. It is, if you could recast any role and put Nicolas Cage in it, which movie and character would you choose? On Facebook, we're going to start with Ken, who is over at Better on Draft. And he says, hear me out. Agent Paul Smecker from Boondock Saints. Defoe was great, but Cage could take it to a whole nother level.
I actively hate Boondock Saints. So I don't know.
Do you hate it because of the movie or because of the director or both?
I hate it because of the movie. I mean, did you ever see the documentary about Troy, whatever his name is?
Oh, yeah.
It's called Underground?
Duffy.
Is that what it's called?
It's called How to Shoot Yourself in the Head.
Yeah, might as well be.
No, that's what it's called, is How to Shoot Yourself in the Head. It's something like the untold story of making a cult, but that's the full title.
Is it really called that?
Yeah.
Oh, I thought it was called like Underground or something, because he's like...
I wouldn't be surprised if there's more than one about him at this point, but the one that I watched was called How to Shoot Yourself in the Head.
What is his name? Troy.
I think it's Troy Duffy. I believe he still works as a bouncer in a bar in Boston now that he's so good at filmmaking.
Overnight. It's called Overnight. There's more than one way to shoot yourself. A real-life Tinseltown parable.
I was close. Our friend Evan, who's also over on Facebook, says, Colonel Kurtz in Apocalypse Now, he would have been better than Brando, and it would have possibly made watching all 3 hours worth. I have not watched Apocalypse Now since I was in like middle school, and I have no desire to go back to it. So even if Nicolas Cage was in it, I don't think that would be at the top of my list. I think it would make the movie better, but not enough to make me want to watch it again.
There's a documentary that Coppola's wife made while they made Apocalypse Now, and it's like a making of. I can't remember what it's called. It's like Apocalypse something. Apocalypse Then.
In general, do you like war movies?
War movies? I think when I was younger, I did.
I don't. I find them depressing.
Yeah, I like some. Like I like Fury. I like Saving Private Ryan, Dunkirk. Like some 1917 I thought was really good.
I mean, I liked Inglourious Bastards, but that's like as fictitious a war movie as you can get.
Yeah. When I was a kid, I liked Big Red 1. I think it's that movie with all those dudes in it. There's one that's like it's like over Christmas, and the French and the Germans, I think it's French or maybe English, and the Germans, they're like fighting over this place, and it's Christmas, and they get together and like whatever. It's cold, so they're like gonna die anyways, even if they win. I can't remember what that's called, but I thought that was pretty interesting. But I mean, whatever.
So we're going to switch gears and go to Instagram, and we have 2 different responses from the members of the Krusty Boys and their Krusty podcast. You can follow them at yourunpodcast.com and on social medias. So the first one says, Nick Cage is a Hell Priest in Hellraiser. Yes, I don't care for Hellraiser. You have Nick Cage playing the Hell Priest, especially if you have 1980s coked up Nick Cage playing the Hell Priest. You sold a ticket. And then we also have Nick Cage as Julie Walker in Return of the Living Dead 3. Sure. Why the fuck not? No comment.
I haven't seen it.
We'll get there eventually. Then over at Quad Pro Quo Pod, say that one time fast, Cage replaces Jeff Goldblum in Jurassic Park because life finds a way. I prefer my eccentric dinosaur hunter as Jeff Goldblum, but I would watch either. And then last, but certainly not least, on Instagram, we have Probabopop. Sure. He says, Thing is perfect in every way, but I would love to see how Nick Cage would handle the MacReady character.
MacReady?
He says MacReady. Put a space in there. That's another one. I can't recast the Thing, but okay.
Yeah, it's a tough one. That's tough.
And then last, we're going to head over to X, and on X, we have our first response from Boomers over at Podcast in the Woods, also on the You Run Podcast Network. And he says, this is kind of skirting the question, and I get it, but I would love to see Cage in a future Evil Dead movie. Let's take the franchise back to its campy roots and have some comedy and horror by someone who is strong enough to carry the entire film. I would have no problem with that. It still wouldn't feel like Evil Dead to me, and we've had this conversation. It needs Bruce Campbell for that. But if you had Nick Cage in a Evil Dead successor type movie or a spiritual successor to the Evil Dead, I would 100% watch that.
Maybe you could recast him in My Southern Family Christmas in the Bruce Campbell role.
It couldn't hurt. Our most listened to episode ever, My Southern Family Christmas, with a whopping 12 plays.
Something like that.
Yeah. So Newman over at Movies for Days, also on the You Run Podcast Network, says, Lincoln from 2012. I want to see Nicolas Cage as President Abraham Lincoln. Sold. I'd watch it.
Is that Daniel Day-Lewis? Is that who that is?
Yeah, and I never watched that one because I could be wrong about how long it is, but I feel like it was like a 3-hour long like school assignment.
Epic.
I just didn't. Yeah, I didn't care. I'm sure he's fantastic in it as an actor, but like I just don't care. But you put Nick Cage in there, sure, I'll watch Nick Cage talk about Gettysburg or whatever for 3 hours.
4
And then
you'd listen to him for 4 hours.
7 years.
Wow,
It's a long movie.
I guess.
And last, certainly not least, wrapping this up is our friends over at Dissect That Film. They are letting us know that you need to replace Mark Wahlberg with Nick Cage in The Happening. I wouldn't have walked out of the theater halfway through if he was there yelling at the killer air.
I've never seen The Happening. I mean, I know kind of what happens. It's like the trees or something, right? But I have...
Isn't that the one where the dude smacks a lion in the face and the lion just like murders the fuck out of him?
I haven't seen it. Maybe.
Okay. I feel like that's the movie that like threw Shyamalan off the like deep end. I think I've seen it, but it's been a long time.
It was a slow progression uphill to get to the peak where he could jump off. And yeah.
Well, yeah, but I think that's the one where he made the jump, if I remember.
Yeah, maybe. I remember. I've heard things about it, but I haven't seen it.
Maybe we need to do an episode about that.
Oof.
Hey, we haven't done a Shyamalan movie yet.
True.
So.
Very true.
Yeah.
That might be the one. The one where he jumps off the deep end. Let's go see that one.
I think he started in the deep end. I think this is the one where he got to the apex and then jumped back deeper. All right. That's all we have as far as questions this week. I don't really have anything else to add here.
You're not going to ask me my opinion?
Oh, yeah, sure. What do you want to see Nick Cage as?
None. That's my answer. That's my real answer. But I would love to see Nicolas Cage as the Jeff Goldblum character, Brindle in The Fly. That would be cool. The remake of The Fly with Gina Davis and Jeff Goldblum. And I would love to see Nicolas Cage play Art the Clown.
Mind blown.
Head explode.
Head explode. Do I have an answer for this? I do. I want to see Nicolas Cage play Angela.
Nicolas Cage?
I said Nicolas Cage, didn't I?
No, you said Nicolas Cage.
I want to see Nicolas Cage play Angela in Sleepaway Camp. But I don't want him to go back in time and be young Nicolas Cage. I want him as like 60-year-old Nicolas Cage. I think that would be better.
Yeah, I'm envisioning my answers as current day.
Yeah, I want current day. You can make him play a 16-year-old girl or whatever she's supposed to be in that movie. So he can be 60-year-old man Nicolas Cage playing 16-year-old girl Angela. But that's going to be my answer is Nicolas Cage in Sleepaway Camp.
I like it. You get seal of approval from me.
Well, see, making the world a better place.
There you go. One movie at a time.
One movie at a time, one podcast episode at a time, one plug at a time. That's what we do, apparently. So we're going to wrap up here. And I'm going to say, if you like what we do, or if you don't like what you do, If you don't like what you do, you have bigger problems. If you don't like what we do, you can tell us about it. There's all kinds of ways you can do that. You can go to our website, which is crap.town. There's a feedback option on there. You can leave feedback on whatever podcast platform you choose. You can find us on social media at Dewey Pod Monster, and you can yell at me more directly. Whatever you want to do, we're here for it. If you want to send us audio messages, we can play them on the show. Even if it's you yelling at us, we might do that. That'd be, honestly, I might find entertainment in that. At Dewey Pod Monster, all over the place. You can also find our YouTube channel, which is at UE. God, I cannot talk anymore tonight. You can also find our YouTube. Fuck it, Sean, take over.
You can also find our YouTube page at youtube.com/@DeweyPodMonster, just to take over for John because he can't talk anymore. I was also going to say, if you want your answer to the question of the week read on this fine show, and John can read that for us, find us on all the social media. He posts it whenever he posts it, and you can answer it whenever you answer it. Also, thanks again to everybody who is answering the poll questions. Everything that we talk about on the show, we have linked in the show notes, so click on those show notes. Some of those are affiliate links. They'll take you to Amazon or other places. And if you spend $1 or $2, we might get 1/1,000,000 of a cent. So that'll help me pay for all those streaming services. And if you want to find my craft beer adventures in the state of Michigan, you can find it at youtube.drafttherapy.com, or you can find me on all the social media networks at Draft Therapy.
That's right. I good not talk to you next week, maybe. For sure. Why not?
Talk good.
Good talk.
Bye good.
Juice Steven good. Yes.
Blah, blah, blah.